I spoke to a few hiring managers at my company actually before, in data specifically, after you reached out to me, and more than a couple of them said, like, just having that curiosity, that's so important because
This is a quick little note, but as I'm editing this content right now, I have to cut some things out. So if it sounds a little bit choppy sometimes, just know that it was in attempts of trying to make this video a little bit shorter and easier to follow through with. So yeah. Hi everyone, welcome to Casual Career Fridays. I'm your host, Gabby, and today I'm joined by Ellis, who is a data engineer at Insight. Ellis, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ellis. I'm a UNC alumni. I majored in economics and I minored in statistics. And currently I'm working as a data engineer at Insight.
That's awesome. So give me a little bit about like your career background, like what made you choose your major and like what led you to your current role?
Yeah, so back in high school, I kind of fell in love with economics, and it was just one of those things where I was like, I need to know what's going on in this space. And so that's what kind of drove my major. Also, a lot of economics is data driven as well. And then when I was at UNC, there wasn't a BS in economics, and I think there is now. And so I knew that doing something math or science related alongside, in my case, it was statistics, would allow me to explore that more, I guess, sciencey math, for lack of better explanation, through the statistics minor at UNC. A lot of those classes are all about data. And so, data analytics, modeling, data science. And so through those classes, I kind of found something that I really enjoyed and something that's been exciting and fulfilling for me.
Great, that's awesome. And so I know that your role is a data engineer. So there's a bunch of job roles with like data science and like being a computer science major. So could you explain like the difference of like what you do versus like what a software engineer would do? And what does like your role look like?
Yeah, definitely. So a software engineer is primarily, I don't want to say primarily because I don't work in that realm, but they develop applications, they develop software, um, and that ultimately we as data engineers, we use the tools that they create to leverage, or we leverage those tools to do our work day to day. And so you're thinking like they are probably like the most back end level of all of this. They're building the platforms and the technologies that we use. In terms of what a data engineer does day to day, we largely focus on data collection, data sourcing, getting that all the way through to a place that, in my case, I work in consulting. So a place that the client can actually use this data. The data is operational. It makes sense with what their business needs. A lot of companies collect data and don't do anything with it. And so, nor do they have the infrastructure, the teams to be able to figure out what to do with it. And a lot of companies nowadays are they're pivoting towards, data-driven solutions. And
Yeah, they are.
and so a lot of it is, yeah, just getting data usable, getting it
Right.
accurate, getting it to a place that it can actually be used.
Gotcha. So do you think that in your role you don't do like a lot of coding, you would say? It's more so like making the data accessible, or do you do a lot of coding?
In my day-to-day, yeah, there's a lot of coding and development work. So in data engineering, there's this process called ETL, or ELT, is a new version where it's extract, transform, and load. And so that extract is kind of collecting the data from whatever source it's coming from. The transform part is, I mean, that's largely where I work. So a lot of this applying business logic or business needs, this is where that getting the data usable comes in. And so that's where a lot of the coding and development work plays into sort of this whole process, applying these changes or building new notebooks out with, fully fledged code to create new tables and stuff
Right.
like that.
Oh my goodness, your role is loaded. I feel like it must be
Yeah.
sometimes like a challenge to describe. Like anytime that I've asked someone like a computer science major or like a data science major or professional what they do, they're like, how do I put this into like
Yeah,
terms that they will
it's hard.
understand? And then for internships, that's like the main, everyone's always looking
Totally.
for internships, especially like in that world of where you're in. And, what's a good way that you did and that tips that you would give to college students right now to find internships?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest part, right? Is getting your foot in the door for that first one.
Right.
It seems because you're breaking into a new world that you've never been in before. And so I think my biggest tips are, going to career fairs. Campus recruiting is huge. A lot of companies want to get people coming right out of college, especially in tech, because we can get onboarded into the exact technologies and that they want us to use and stuff like that. There's not a lot of, pivoting from one to another if you were, working in other stuff at another company. How I got my first internship, I interned at Epic Games as a data analytics intern. Really, the only data experience I had was in these statistics classes, and so, I had some connections through some parents' friends, and by no means is this like, oh, if you have a connection, you're definitely going to get the job. It's just helpful to
Right.
have, you know, we don't know of every opportunity that's out there, and especially when
Hmm.
you're 19, 20 years old, any help is good help. And so if someone can say, hey, I can, this person has great character, they do really well in school, they have an aptitude for X, Y, or Z, can I pass their resume along to you?
Right.
That's huge, and I recognize that not everyone has those connections that they're able to leverage, but if you do, I would say that that's a huge part in this whole process.
Absolutely.
And then for my second internship, I interned at Bloomberg because I wanted to kind of scratch the more financial economics itch, but I was also an analytics intern there, but more for
Yeah.
financial data.
How would you even leverage, you know, getting an internship in the first place if you don't have a background?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I think that, at least in my experience, the companies that I've interned for, especially when it comes to an internship, they're not looking for you to be the most technical person or the most proficient in, they're not expecting that. They want someone who they can teach and, they can count on to be curious. One of the most consistent questions I've gotten through the many interviews I've done in the last couple years is, why data? Or it could be why X for someone else. And I think ultimately it boils down to what's the reason? I mean, for me, what about data scratches an itch for me? Why did I originally want to go into this field? And I think if you can express that curiosity, express that passion in a genuine way,
Yeah.
then that can really help set you apart. I spoke to a few hiring managers at my company actually before, in data specifically, after you reached out to me, and more than a couple of them said, like, just having that curiosity, that's so important, because if you can have someone curious on your team, you know that they're going to do the due diligence and they're going
Hmm.
to dive deeper. They're not just going to stop where, at the most surface level.
What tip would you tell students on building their portfolio?
Totally, yeah. I've never had to personally show any of my projects, but I've definitely had to speak to them, and just kind of go through the thought process behind solutioning something or building something. I can remember specifically some of the final projects being an end-to-end process. So, speaking to how you collect the data, how can you tell that the data is accurate? What did you do to clean up the data? Speaking
Mm.
to what you do in class, and then also any sort of extracurriculars too.
And one of the other questions that we had submitted from like CS students is like, how can they stand out amongst like the competition when there's so many applicants going to like the same role? So what do you feel is a really good trait or, what to do in that scenario?
Yeah, I think that It's tough. I definitely have felt the effects of that too, especially coming right out of college.
Right.
But I think ultimately just going back to what is your why? And it might sound cheesy, but if you can, stay true to your reasons for being there and applying for these roles, you're eventually going to find a company who really values that and who aligns with you. It definitely helps to have some some technical skills too. I wouldn't worry about knowing all of them because once you know one language or you're comfortable in one coding language, it's pretty easy to pivot to another. I think that just you know, having a reason for why you're there, why you want to be there, not necessarily at that company, but in a role like that is really important. And I mean, to be frank, there were summer after college, I interviewed at a lot of different places and a lot of them weren't good fits, but I eventually found one that really was. And two, this is a little bit more retroactive, but as you're interviewing, every interview is a learning opportunity and it doesn't hurt at all. I think it only stands to help if you ask for feedback. If they're like, sorry, we're passing on you, message them back and say, what about me would you have liked to seen
Right.
instead?
That's a really rare tip that I've heard. That's a good one though, like to ask for feedback as to why they passed you along. That's really good. The last question is, what are your thoughts? I don't know if you have an answer for this one. If not, it's cool. What are your thoughts on cybersecurity being like the next big career field?
I don't know a ton about cybersecurity, but I think that given, and I don't want to speak too broadly here because I'm not by any means an expert on this field, but just being a little bit in the space, I think, we're seeing more and more sophisticated cyber attacks. And
Hmm.
because AI is advancing, they're just everything is advancing. And so
Hmm.
I think that it probably makes sense that cybersecurity is a great field to go into because, as these attacks get more and more sophisticated, we need more soldiers per se on the
Right.
side of being able to fight against that. And also, too, on the flip side, being able to leverage AI tools to keep that stuff from happening.
How do you feel that AI space is also changing the sphere of data world and
Yeah.
CS world?
It's interesting and it's always a hot topic around the office. Because the data scientists feel one way about, that's why that's part of I feel like they're all like, yes, 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 this is amazing because they get to explore it and help to build the tools and to leverage those tools. And some of the rest of us are like, that's really cool, but what about, I think there are two sides of every coin. I think that there's going to be some great stuff that comes out of this generative AI space. But I also think that there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be figured out, especially
Yeah,
in terms of the ethics around it. Just like anything, something that can be used for good can also be used for bad. So making sure that it's in the right people's hands is always important.
I think those are all the questions that we covered. You were so great. What a vibe. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Do you have any like remaining? I feel like you touched on like a lot of really good tips, like interview tips, and stuff like that of like what people should say. Do you have any last remaining thoughts that you would like to like tell people who are currently struggling through these classes?
Um, well, college is temporary.
True.
It's not easy by any means. Maybe for some people it is, but it's definitely a grind. And it may seem like it won't, this is just how it's gonna be. But if you can find something that scratches the itch for you. In my case, at least right now in my season of life that I'm in, it's data, then you might not be head over heels in love with work, waking up and doing it every day for 8 hours, but it at least will be enough to, you know, be fulfilling, which I
Right.
found it to be. And so I feel fortunate in that because, you know, I'm sure you know people too who aren't super happy in their jobs, but I think as long as you, if I guess in short, if you're in college and you've already chosen data, then I think that if you've chosen data because you enjoy data, or you know it scratches some sort of itch for you, then I think that you're gonna at least mildly enjoy the beginnings of your career, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I try
good.
to do what makes you happy, but I
Yeah.
know that's not always the easiest thing. So
Right, right. I like that you're very real about it. I appreciate it. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much, Ellis, for, joining us today and talking about your role and giving us all these good tips. Be sure to check out Career Services resources that will be linked below. And thanks for watching, you guys. Bye.
I completely lost my train of thought.
It happens.
Um,